Now the third step, and the only remaining step left, is to have a class that instantiates these objects of user detail class and calls the Hibernate API to save it. We need to have some of these objects initially to save, and we will hard code some initialization code for these user details, and we will pass the object to Hibernate in order to save it. So we will create a simple class with the main method, new class, Hibernate. I'll call this class as Hibernate test, and it'll have a main method. Finish. Now inside this main method, what I'll do is I will instantiate an object of this user details class. Okay, now I need to import this class here. Okay, that's done. Now let me create some, let me initialize the value of this. Set user ID, I'll pass the value of 1. User.set username. Call this user as first user. Now I have an object here with initialized values. Now I need to persist this object. I need to save this object in the database. Now how do I do that? I do that by using the Hibernate APIs. Normally what would happen is, if this were a service method, you would normally want to create a data layer method, a DAO, and pass this object to the DAO, and the DAO would take care of using Hibernate APIs to save this. But for our example, we will use the Hibernate APIs in the service method itself. There are a few steps involved in using the Hibernate APIs. Let's quickly go over those steps. The first step is to create something called as a session factory. A session factory is only one object per application, and what this object does is it creates sessions depending on how many of the sessions you want in your application throughout its execution period. Now, if you want to save something, you get a session from the session factory and then you use that session to save. But you would need a session factory to be created upfront in your application, so that all the different methods and all the different pieces of code in your application use the session factory to get hold of the session objects. Now this session factory is created out of the configuration that we've already done. We have used the hibernate.cfg.xml configuration file to tell Hibernate what our database is, what are the configuration we need, and all those things. So using this configuration file, we will be creating a session factory. So that's the first step. Now after we create a session factory, which is, again, as I mentioned, only once in your application, you will create sessions from the session factory every time you want to use the database, be it to save or to retrieve data, whatever it is. You will create sessions from the session factory, and then once you have a session, you will use that session to save model objects. In this case, it's a save. It could be any other database operation. You would use the session object. So these are 3 simple steps that we will write right now. So in order to build a session factory, in order to create a session factory, what I need to do is I need to get the configuration. And this is the configuration that we've already done, hibernate.cfg.xml. So we need to ask Hibernate to open up that configuration file. So what I do is I create a new configuration object, and I will call a method of this configuration object called configure. Now what this configure method does is it takes this configuration file, and then it reads the configuration file to understand what is the database configuration that needs to be made. Now once we do the configure, Then we can call the build session factory method. Now this build session factory method returns a session factory. So this is what we need. So I will create a new session factory object, and I will assign this configuration.configure.build session factory. So what I'm doing again, I'm taking the configuration and I'm calling the configure method of the configuration so that it goes to this XML file and then it reads the configuration, and then I'm calling the build session factory so that it builds a session factory object based on the configuration that we have provided. Now the build session factory returns a session factory object that I am assigning to my local session factory variable. Let me get all the imports right. So session factory is org.hibernate, and configuration is again org.hibernate.cfg. Okay, so now I have the session factory object. I can use this to create new sessions. Right now I want to save this user object, so I need a session object to save. So I'll define a new session object here, equals session factory dot there is a open session method here. So I'm opening a new session of the session factory object. I will again have to import the session from the org.hibernate package. Okay, now that I have the session object, I can use the session object to save my model objects. In this case, I just have one model object, which is user. I can use the session object to save that. So before saving a model object, first thing I need to do is to create a transaction. I'll have to begin a transaction, and I do that by using session.begin transaction. Now a new transaction is created, and now in this transaction I can save as many objects as I want, and I will use this transaction to define the single unit of work. So I can group all these objects to be saved, and I can save them all inside this transaction. In our case, we just have a user object, so I will need to save just one user object. So the way I save the object is by using session.save. Now the session.save has one argument, which is the object itself. I will pass the user object here. Okay, now that I've saved this, I will have to end the transaction, and the way to end the transaction is to first get the transaction that I've started here and then do a commit for that transaction. So I would do a session dot get transaction dot commit. So I haven't done any error handling here, but say I did error handling. What I would do is I would put this whole thing inside a try block, and inside my catch block I would probably do a get transaction dot rollback. But we'll keep this simple for now. Now with the commit, we are actually done with the coding. So we do not do any splitting open of the object, getting all the values, building the SQL queries. None of that we do. We just pass the object to Hibernate, and provided that we have configured the object properly, these two configurations. One is the annotations. The second thing is adding that object class name into the mapping class. Then we're all set. Hibernate knows what needs to be done to save this. So it'll take care of saving this object, this particular user object, to the database. So let's run this and watch as Hibernate does its magic. So first, let's open up the Postgres console. Now I can expand Hibernate DB. So this is where the object is getting saved. Now in my public, there are no tables. Now Hibernate is going to create the table for us when we run this. So let's run this as a Java application. Yes, save this. Okay, now we can see in the console there is this insert query. Okay, Hibernate has created this insert query and it has actually run it. Now note what it's inserting to. It's inserting to a table called user details. Now this is the table that Hibernate generated for us in order to save our user details.java. So the table name is same as our class name. So this is an intelligent default that Hibernate does for us. And then now look at the column names inside in this table name. We have username and user ID. Again, it's same as our member variable name. So again, this is taken the default and it has created this table for us. The table is user details with 2 columns, and it has inserted the values. Of course, it's question mark here, but what it would have done is it would have inserted the user ID as 1 and the first user as the username. Now let's have a look at this. Now tables is still 0 because I haven't refreshed it. I refresh, there you go. We have a user details table here, and it has 2 columns. User ID is the primary key. Username is not the primary key, again because we have set ID for the user ID and nothing for the username. Now let's look at the data here. View all rows. Well, there you go. We have the user ID as 1 and the name as first user. These are the values that we have set in our main method. So what Hibernate has done for us is it's created a table and it has inserted the value here, which is the value that we had set for our model object. So no matter how complex your object is, as long as you configure it right, Hibernate will take care of all the heavy lifting. It'll convert this into SQL queries, it'll generate the table for you, and it'll do the insert. So in the next tutorials, we're going to look at what other things we can do. We need to do, there is a lot of configurations that we can do in order to tailor the way Hibernate does this for us. There's a lot of automatic defaults that are happening. For example, the class name is same as the table name. The field names are same as the column names. So we will have a look at how we can configure all these things in a bit more detail in the subsequent tutorials.